Christians around the world are marking Good Friday. In Rome, Pope Francis just presided over a torchlit procession to commemorate the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Here's a depiction of that moment from the iconic movie, The Passion of the Christ. A day that should be dedicated to honoring Christ's ultimate sacrifice has been marred as Christians from Nigeria to Egypt are under attack from Islamic radicals. In an Easter message, British Prime Minister David Cameron makes a call to action.
So as we celebrate Easter, let us also think of those who are unable to do so. The Christians around the world who are ostracized, abused, even murdered, simply for the faith they follow. Religious freedom is an absolute fundamental human right. Britain is committed to protecting and promoting that right by standing up for Christians and other minorities at home and abroad.
Well, good for Cameron. You know, Eric, it's amazing to me. This is the first leader of a country that I can remember that has spoken out about this. I mean, the silence from Obama in the White House is amazing, but I give Cameron a lot of credit for doing it. But it just seems nobody else will talk about it.
Right, because it's politically incorrect, especially to talk about it here. President Obama doesn't want to do that. Look, Muslims, from Muslims in Egypt to atheists right here, Christians, we're under full frontal assault. It's a difficult topic to take the other side of. Here we're doing it because people are dying, and thank God David Cameron has done it. President Obama to do it, though, I'm not sure he's got what's in it for him politically to do it, though.
Well, I mean, I think politically, frankly, he's probably a good thing for him to do it because he's been under attack for being too soft on Muslims.
Won't he look like he Right. Well, he looked like he flip-flopped on yet another issue.
That's one way to get yourself out of a problem, right? I mean, I think it would have been an ideal moment for him to do it. But anyway, Andrea, the faith, what's happening in the persecution? Now, it used to be in the Middle East, had 26% population was Christian 20 years ago. Now it's 10%, and it's falling lower every day as Christians flee or get killed. I mean, isn't it time for somebody to stand up and say something about it besides just Cameron?
Absolutely. And David Cameron is also seeing a lot of rioting on the streets of London. The tension between the Catholics and the Christians in England and the Muslims has really started to boil over. And so I do think that his timing of the statement is perfect. He knows he has to address it. And I'm glad that he did. It does seem, though, you're right, Bob, like the last acceptable form of discrimination in the world now is really Christians. They're persecuting them in Egypt. We've talked about this on the show. And I really think it's up to the United States to speak out and lead. And I don't know why the president doesn't just not stand up for Christians, but he goes out of his way to specifically say to the people that are committing these atrocious attacks that we are not at war with radical Islam, that we have a shared history of tolerance, when it has been anything but. And to this day, Christians are being murdered. I don't understand why he doesn't use his bully pulpit to speak up more in defense of something that is pretty indefensible.
Yeah, you know, Andrew makes a good point. A lot of these European countries have an influx of Muslims, particularly in France and in England. And maybe it is that they're just afraid of civil disruptions if they decide to take it on. But Cameron clearly had enough guts to do it.
He had enough guts, and I agree with Andrea. I think this absolutely requires American leadership. I mean, if you look at the stories, you talk about these Nigerian schoolgirls that are being abducted, bomb attacks in bus stations in Nigeria. The rate of abduction among Christian girls is going up. I mean, I see politicians in this country really willing to talk about a war on women when we talked about domestic politics and all of this nonsense. There is a war on Christian women that's going on in these countries, and I think that should be something that we're gutsy enough to call like we see it. And look, President Obama is the leader of the free world. He needs to take a leadership position on this, and good for Cameron, but the United States should join with him in that cause.
I'd say, Dana, I'd find it also, since we don't have a recognized leader of the Christians like Billy Graham anymore in the United States, if you think about it, there's nobody really stands out in that position. But I haven't heard many church leaders speak out about this.
That's why I think that I'm not going to criticize President Obama as much on this in particular thing. I do wish that he would speak up a little bit more, but I also have to remember that where this is happening, and a lot is around the world, where most of America says we don't have a role in the world. They don't want us to get involved anywhere. So why should President Obama get involved in any of these things? I have a different position on that from a foreign policy standpoint, and I think that extends to religion as well. However, when it comes to radical Islam, I do think we are at war with radical Islam. And President Obama and other leaders before him have tried to make a distinction between the radicals and the extremists versus the broader religious base. But the war that we are in is one about ideology. It's not about faith. And it's about radical Islam and extremists basically murder innocent people to further a political goal, not necessarily a religious goal, though the brainwashing is a serious problem. And I think that might be some place where we could help. The last thing I would say is I don't think that President Obama could actually make a change on this and actually have an impact. I think there is actually only one person right now on the planet who could do that, and it's Pope Francis.
Yeah,
and I think that if he, in some way, I wondered today, could he call a world leader summit and bring some of the major imams together, or some of the leaders of the Muslim countries, along with other Christians or Buddhists and maybe the Dalai Lama? I mean, could you actually pull something like that together and to try to bring the world together?
As uniting as he is, you know why he probably couldn't get that done? Because you'd have to invite the rabbis, you'd have to invite the Israelis, the Jewish people, the Jewish faith, and the Islamists won't meet.
They won't meet.
They won't recognize them.
That's
they don't
right.
think they should be on the face of the earth. They don't think they should be around. And so that could happen. Can I just throw one quick thought in there? We're at war with Islam. This is one of their battlefields. They're doing this because they know this hurts us quite a bit. It hurts West. It hurts Christians, and those are really two of their biggest targets.
You know, one of the things about this whole issue, I think this small show of ours here has done more on this issue than any other journalistic outlet, and I don't understand why they're not willing to do it. Now, when you talk about, when Obama tries to make the distinction between Islamic radicals and then all the rest of the Muslim faith, the problem I've got with that is the rest of the Muslim faith doesn't say anything. You know, I have yet to hear a leader of a Muslim country, or for that matter, a high-ranking cleric or imam, stand up and say, this is wrong.
Well, and to your point, Bob, there was a Pew Study a couple years ago that was done that asked Muslims living in the United States if they agreed that terror attacks were justified. And I would say about a quarter of them said yes.
Really?
Yeah, it was about 23, 28. I'll tweet it out later to check on that stat. That was what was so shocking, is that they actually agreed that there are some instances where people should or could be killed, which goes to your point. Why don't they speak up? People wonder, why aren't more people adamant that these attacks need to stop? I wish it were as easy as a summit, but you know, when you take time to study the history of Islam, which I've done to make sure that I get my facts right, they have been operating this way for hundreds of years. A summit won't change it, a press release won't change it. The only thing that will change it is if we eradicate the radicals by taking basically a 2x4 over their head, which is the only thing they understand.
You know, this is the difference between Christianity and the Muslim. I'm not a theologist, but Muslims want to change the world that we're in now, that they want to take on all what they see as the devil in the United States and the rest of it. Whereas in Christianity, we look for another world, another spirit, and follow Jesus Christ.
But I think that they could look at the history, the totality of the history of Christianity, and say that wasn't always the case as well. And also on the point about Cameron in the UK saying something, it was on this show within the last year that actually it was Prince Charles who gave a statement and read a statement. It was really interesting. Like, wait, where did that come from? Why is Prince Charles doing this? So maybe there is something happening in the UK that we should maybe follow their lead. If they want to take the lead on it, perhaps we should just get behind and try to drive behind them.
I'm wondering if the president did come out, if Barack Obama did come out with a stronger statement, though, if that would affect the way the media chose to cover the story. I'm wondering if a lot of the media types who are very afraid of stories like this and very afraid to address it due to backlash would be inspired to be a little bit more truthful in terms of the stats that Andrea is talking about, and otherwise, if the president showed some leadership on the issue, being that they tend to take his opinion on matters and his authority, you know, if he has authority on a certain position or if he's willing to go out and express it very seriously in terms of what they choose to and not to cover.
There's also the Islamist view, anyone who was an Islamist and turned as someone who is worse than the infidel, right? The opposite is worse than somebody who turned. So I was having a conversation with someone who said, you know, President Obama, he went to a madrasa and now he's a Christian. And I don't want to get into that debate, but I'm not sure that President Obama coming out and bashing radical Islam is, which he has no appetite to do. We know this.
Yeah.
In his Oval Office addresses, when he's talking about Syria, he could have referenced the Christians being persecuted. He did not. But this is how Islam operates. They want to kill the people who've turned on Islam more than they want to kill people who were never Islamists to begin with.
I guess that's
and they'll never stop.
Maybe that's why
until we're all ruled by Muslims.
Maybe some people were too afraid to do it. But let's go back to Pope Francis for a second. He's probably the most serious Christian leader of the entire. I mean, I'm not Catholic, but he's got a lot of exposure. And yet, Eric, I asked him to look into what he said about the persecution of the Christians. Forget his summit. He made a couple of references to it in April, but very vague references. He didn't come out directly and take it on. And I'm wondering why that is.
I have no idea. Right now, he's trying to be, and he's doing a great job at being the inclusive pope. He's casting a wide net, and he's bringing a lot of people into the church. He's had a lot on his plate, Bob. The same-sex marriage stuff. There are a lot of things he's taking into account. That people are pushing him to allow priests to get married. There are a lot of things that he's looking into. I agree with you. This is an important issue. Can I point something out? The reason why the media doesn't cover this stuff, we do, but in general, the media. There are two things. You put shows together. There's two things that really don't rate very well: religion and religion outside of this country. Once you start that, the audience eyes kind of glaze over, and you don't rate. So the media doesn't go after that stuff. We do. To our producers' credit, we're doing this type of discussion in an A block. Most shows wouldn't do that for that very reason.
And listen, audience, you proved them wrong about this. All right, let's get huge numbers watching this tonight, so that we can say, look, it was because we took on the persecution of the Christians. Next on the 5.